was mayor of Martinique's Fort-de-France for over half a century. He enjoyed a political career, first as member of the French Communist Party, like Ho Chi Minh before him, whose book we had on our shelves, and maybe he's gone. And later, the leader of a socialist party of his own making. I should mention, too, he was in the French Assembly for nearly as long as he was mayor. But I don't think his legacy lies in electoral politics. His trade primarily was literature at large and poetry narrowly. Described as a precocious student, he came from perhaps a family of petit bourgeois character. And SWN, too, middle class, from the Granada Hills. His mother was a dressmaker, his father was a tax collector. But he was gifted enough that he studied in Fort-de-France, and eventually he went to Paris to attend university and take and pass the exams which would allow him to teach. I don't know the European system, so I can't break it down any further than that, but you have to, okay. Enough said. Teaching, I'm a teacher, I hate the licensure process, but it's a different system in France, but he passed it, he did it. So he went back to Martinique, he taught. In Paris, he met his would-be wife. He met Francophone Pan-Africanists and those affiliated in the Surrealist artistic movement. By all indications, Paris had the diasporic literary scene was the buzz. Journals, thought were everywhere, and he was polemical. And he called this journal too bourgeois, and he called that journal colorless. You know what I mean?
Yeah. He's a good writer. He's got quite a short pen. We'll find out later as we're going through this text.
Spicy polemicist. And he would eventually contribute to a Parisian journal himself, and then found a journal called Tropiques in Martinique with his wife and others. He's remembered bigly for the idea of negritude, developed with other affiliates of the Parisian journal, Les Estudiants.
Yeah, negritude is French basically for like blackness, or kind of this black movement that he was part of the literary movement. So
Yes, it affirmed blackness in the face of the very specific assimilative stuff they got going on in France, which is its own specific discourse. A huge, we have our issues in the States, but they have a unique flavor of their own thing. So anyway, it pushed back against that. He developed this with others. Today he is taken up as a forerunner to all those thinking of Please, impressive.
Good.
Yes.
Yeah, and so that's something we kind of want to point out, is that as we're kind of starting our journey the next couple months, going through colonial history, going through anti-imperialist thought, we want to kind of remember where we're situating ourselves with this text, and just remember as we're going through it, as you guys were reading it, Césaire is a poet at first. That's his impulse. He is really trying to paint a picture with his words, and he does a damn good job going through this text. And so it's a little bit of if you want an more analytical theory, a more historically grounded kind of thesis. We have Rodney in the back, how Europe underdeveloped Africa. We have Frantz Fanon in the back. Those are, doing more of a class analysis of the colonial situation. But this is supposed to kind of punch you in the gut. Like, that's the reason he wrote it the way that he did, and he made some very distinct choices, and we'll kind of go through that. So, but again, like Mike was saying, super influential with the early, revolutionary black, especially French speakers, and was a kind of I think Fanon called him his maître, his teacher, basically, as far as like this influence that they had. They were from the same island and had that same kind of connection. And so, all right, so next thing we're going to kind of look at, if you guys have been to any of my classes, you guys know one of the main things that I love to do is kind of give us a historical grounding. Okay, so 1950, we've written, we've written this text. Césaire has put it out into the world. What was going on in 1950, okay? So I spent $3 on this map because I couldn't find a good map anywhere of what was going on in 1950, so I'll let you guys know, sacrificing as much as I can for the revolution. So I'm going to kind of show us here a little bit. I know it'll be hard to see. So this is, in the blue right here is French West Africa, okay? So this is still a colony of France in the 1950s. So you still also have the Belgian Congo. You have some weird stuff going on with Britain in the Anglo-Egyptian kind of Sudan. So you still have much of much of Africa is still colonized. Now, in the east, we have obviously the great and beautiful Soviet Union is doing its thing. The People's Republic of China just got its freedom the year before, and we also have our comrades in what's called French Indochina at the time, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, who are fighting, just got done pushing the Japanese out or about to push the French out and then eventually push the Americans out. So this is what's going on as Césaire is writing this text. So this is right after World War II, right? And the whole world is kind of struggling with what happened in the war, what happened with fascism. And as Europe is still recovering from all this, the colonies in Africa specifically everything's starting to kind of like disintegrate. And so the colonies are starting to take independence seriously. The kind of contradictions are sharpening. And this is kind of where we find ourselves in this text. So obviously the text is called Discourse on Colonialism. Well, what is colonialism? How do we kind of situate ourselves when we're talking about colonialism? So if you guys have been to our Marxism 101 class, you've probably seen something like this. History moving in stages. Now, obviously, it's not this linear. The stages overlap oftentimes. There's different modes of production that happen in different times. But inside of capitalism, we can kind of nail down 4 different modes of production when it comes to the capitalist relationship with what we'll call the global south, okay? So you have this primitive accumulation where the European powers are kind of spreading out across the world and extracting huge amounts of resources and kind of building their wealth off the backs of these huge amounts of resources they're collecting from the global south. Then you have this period of colonialism where the world is kind of divided up against among the colonial powers. And so they occupy the land, they have administrators, and they are extracting not just resources, but now also labor on top of that and reproducing their economy in the system. Now, one of the things we'll talk about here in a few weeks when we do our more book studies is this new stage called imperialism after colonialism. Now, imperialism is a little different. It overlaps a lot with colonialism. So as colonialism is dying, imperialism is kind of rising. But to put very briefly, it's kind of a way to control the global south with financial tools, exporting capital and exporting other kind of, and so having different ways to kind of control that. But as the colonies are breaking down and there is this rise in independent colonies, you have this new thing called neocolonialism, which basically means on paper, the colonies are free now. They're independent countries, but in reality, they are still controlled by the colonizing countries that colonized them in the first place. We see this very, very clearly in former French Africa. We see this in Southeast Asia in different ways. There is still this remnant of history that we are living through. So this is kind of situating us in the text as far as what is going on. Does anybody have any questions broadly about the kind of history before we jump into the overview? Good? Okay. So, so now we're going to get into this, like Mike was saying, this beautiful but kind of wild text of Ame Sisera. So again, how this text was broken up wasn't like super linear. So what we kind of had to do when we were putting the study together was draw together some major themes that we kind of thought for the work that we could kind of put together that were repeating and that kind of went over more in depth. So it's not exhaustive. When we do our discussion, we'll kind of give people opportunity to talk about maybe other things that they were drawn out, but we want to kind of keep our perspective and our grounding as wide as we could while we have our time together here. So the first kind of juxtaposition, the first kind of thing that we're going to be talking about is this idea of civilization versus colonization. So one of the key problems that Sisera is dealing with in this text is the contrast between what Western civilization says it has as its goals when it's going into the colonies and what it is actually doing on a day-to-day basis. Because remember, as Marxists, we are dealing with the material reality of things. We are dealing with what is actually happening. We don't care what a system says its goals are. We care what the system actually does on a daily basis. And so Sisera is kind of raising the mirror of Western humanism, Western civilization, and making it look at itself. And I think we'll find as we go through this text that what Sisera finds and what we find as well is not very pretty. So this is kind of one of our first big block quotes. Now, I hope you guys didn't, this is our, I hope you guys didn't come to a book study thinking that you wouldn't have to read a little bit. So could somebody raise their hand and volunteer to read the first, go ahead, Nick.
And I say that between colonization and civilization, there is an infinite distance. That out of all the colonial expeditions that have been undertaken, out of all the colonial statutes that have been drawn up, out of all the memoranda that have been dispatched by all the ministries, there could not come a single human value.
Okay, so you see this kind of contrast that he's drawing, and so why? Now we have to ask the question: why? Why is there such a this kind of difference, this juxtaposition between what the Western powers say and what they do? Now, I'll remind you guys of how these kind of systems are set up. Right? If you guys have been to our 101 Marxism 101 class, you'll know what we're talking about: superstructure and base. So we know that the basis of society is this bottom part, right? The material world, the actual economic conditions that are being reproduced in a society. So that is the base of what is going on. But the problem is when the economic nuts and bolts of a system kind of suck, you have to create an ideology that justifies the existence of this sucky, terrible situation, right? So when you have exploitation, you have to have a system that has a way to justify this exploitation or to make it seem natural or to make it seem inevitable, right? And so that is where the superstructure comes in. So we have culture, we have religion, philosophy, education, media, and we're going to be talking about how a lot of that comes into play through this text and how that is used in the French core against the French colonized in Africa, okay? So just a little bit of a background on there. So again, what people we got to focus on, what they say about the system, which is the superstructure, supports what they do, which is the economic base. Okay, so we're going to go through a few examples of this that he kind of draws out in the text. So first kind of example of this is this idea that economic development equals human development, right? We still see people talking about this kind of stuff today where they're like, well, the GDP in Africa actually is up last year, so everything is actually doing a lot better there. And it's like, that doesn't matter, right? If you have two people and one person's making $0 and the other person's making $1 million, the GDP of those two people is $500,000. That's not how this stuff works, right? We have to think about we have to think about other ways of doing analysis and understanding the world. So this doesn't matter for us. How this actually plays out in real life is more like this, right? So we have economic development for the colonial countries equals extreme exploitation of labor and resources in the colonized country. So again, we're going to be building on this idea throughout it, but I want you guys to get in your head that capitalism as a system is not just benefiting from, but is dependent on this arrangement, on the actual exploitation and super exploitation of profits and resources in the global south. Without this arrangement, capitalism as it exists today does not function at all, okay? So this is the system that we are living under, and I, again, want to kind of understand that this is built into capitalism. This isn't a bug. This isn't something we could fix. This is a feature of the system, right? And we'll talk more about that later. But I want to give you guys a little bit more of examples of kind of how this looks in real life, right? We're talking about what actually happened. So this isn't the best map, but it was a map in 1960 of the railroad. So you'll see all the black lines are the railroad systems that were in Africa in 1960 when a lot of the country was starting to become independent. So do you guys notice anything about this rail system? Exactly. So the rail system is only going out. It's not interconnecting the countries. It's not for the benefit of the people living in the colonized countries. It is simply for extraction, to take out of the country. So the colonizer might say, oh, well, we are building infrastructure in Africa. We're doing all this stuff. Yes, you're building as much infrastructure as you need to extract the wealth from the country, and that is it. Okay, so this is an example of the way that this actually works out in real life. So another example is on the left, you'll see this idea of land requisition. And so a lot of people might not realize how this actually worked in real life when they went into places like Africa. Is a lot of the civilizations in Africa were agrarian and they were subsistence farmers. And so they had enough food to feed themselves and to feed their community and to save up when they could, obviously susceptible to famines and droughts and stuff like that. But they had enough food. When the African colonizers came in, right, the British and the French, they said, not only did they take the people off of their land, but they said, instead of growing food that you can eat here in your nation, we're going to grow, this soil is actually better for cocoa, and this soil is better for tobacco, and this soil is better for, whatnot. Like, they started, so you had this process where not only were you taking people off of their land, but you were taking their food source, right? And so you have in this process actually the creation of this extreme poverty, right? This extreme poverty that we see to this day was a creation of this system. The same thing happened on the right side of the screen when the British went into India. A lot of people don't realize when the British went into India, India was a huge manufacturer of textiles. It was they had a fourth of all the market in the world, right? They were a huge exporter and had advanced textile processes. And Britain at the same time also did this. And so they shut this down. They destroyed the Indian textile industry and made sure that they had to start exporting textiles when previously they were exporting more on their side. So you have this process of literally the economy and the food sources and the land of these people being stripped away and taken away, and this is the idea of development that we're talking about. All right. So next thing that we can kind of get from the text is this idea that, oh yeah, the colonizing countries are making money, but they're bringing civilization to the world, right? So it's this idea that places like Africa and Latin America were these black voids that just had no civilization and no people, and they were going in and kind of bringing, for the first time, bringing people into this knowledge of the world. And so, but the problem is that actually in the process, what they actually do is in the process of their colonial pillage, the colonizing countries destroyed many actually existing civilizations, right? They divided nations. They drew random lines on a map and created countries just based on colonial interests. You had all of this actually happening, and they destroyed actually existing civilizations. I'm going to give you guys just a quick quote here on. So these are examples of different civilizations that existed pre-colonization. You had the imperial city of Hue in Vietnam, Marina Kingdom in Madagascar, the Mali Empire in Sudan, and then you also had the city of Benin and the Kingdom of Benin. And this is what Dutch explorers found in the 1600s when they came across Benin. They said, and I'll read the quote. It says, "The town seemed to be very great. When you entered into it, you got into great broad streets, not paved, which seemed to be 7 or 8 times broader than the widest street in Amsterdam. The king's palace was a collection of buildings which occupy as much space as the town of Haarlem and which is enclosed with walls. There are numerous apartments for the prince's ministries and fine galleries, most of which are as big as those on the exchange in Amsterdam. They are supported by wooden pillars encased with copper, where their victories are depicted, and which are carefully kept clean. The town is composed of 30 main streets, very straight and 120 feet wide, apart from an infinity of small intersecting streets. The houses are close to one another, arranged in good order, and these people are in no way inferior to the Dutch as regard to cleanliness. They wash and scrub their houses so well that they are polished and shining like a looking glass." This was in the 1600s, right? This was a civilization. These were people that had culture, that were master woodworkers and metal workers, advanced technologies in some of these ways. The only thing that the colonizers were most advanced was in violence and building ships, and that was why they were able to take over the way that they did. All right, so last one that we're going to kind of talk about is this idea of on a personal level, and this is something Césaire spends a pretty good time talking about, is this. What they say is the ultimate benefit of to the colonizer, that the colonizer is civilizing the savage, right? There's this kind of this kind of third world mind that you can't comprehend, that you have to start kind of helping. The colonizers helping bring all this culture and understanding, and so. What actually happened, though, is that through this process of brutalization and dehumanizing the colonized, that we had this interesting process where the colonizer actually becomes a savage themselves, right? And so Césaire talks about this as, he calls the process thingification. And so in this process, you have this colonizer who's coming in and creating this savage in their mind, right? You need this other person. You need this other person that you are exploiting and killing and raping and taking their land to not really be a person. Otherwise, you can't really justify what you're doing to them in your mind, right? So you create this savage, right? We see this to this day, right? You hear people coming back from the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. You hear about IOF soldiers, talking about Palestinians, right? The way that they talk about these human beings as these monsters, as these savages, as these people that can't, that they don't really care about their family, they don't really care about themselves. It's just this idea of creating this process, right? But Césaire notes something interesting in this, is he says, in that process of dehumanizing another person, you actually become this savage. You actually become this monster that you've created in your mind, right? And this is kind of interesting because this is stuff that James Baldwin talks about, Frantz Fanon talks about, this whole process of creating and needing to disfigure someone in your mind so much that you actually end up kind of disfiguring yourself. And so one of the things about this text that is interesting is he's kind of making this dialectical argument that this situation, this colonial situation, is bad for everyone, right? Obviously, certain people are benefiting from it in material ways, but on a human level, it's bad for everyone. And so that's one of the reasons we need to throw it in the trash bin. But, we'll talk more about kind of how that will work in a little bit. But one of the things that I want to kind of help us take home, and this is more of an application thing, but I think it's important for us to talk here, is, and this is what we had kind of talked about before, is this idea that we cannot just have a nice kind of social democracy in this country or in former colonial countries, because what we benefit from in this country is a direct result of the exploitation and the resources and the labor that we are taking from other places. And so if we care about the suffering in other parts of the world, if we care about decolonialism anti-imperialism, all of these things, and connecting our struggle with like other parts of the world, then we have to see that our solutions have to be, one, international. Our solution and our scope has to be an international scope, because otherwise then we're just kind of beating our heads against the wall and not really fixing the problem upstream far enough. We have to understand that the solution has to be, two, systemic, which means we are fighting a system. Capitalism is an expansive, broad system, and so we have to fight it with another system, with another way of doing things, right? We cannot just fix stuff downstream and fix the ills of capitalism. We have to go to the source and cut out the cancer. And then the next thing is we have to be urgent. Like, this kind of stuff is still, it's affecting millions and millions and millions of people all across the world every day. And we can't sit here in our comfort and our privilege and what we're doing here and say, well, you know, we just have to be patient. If you've read like Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, that's like 80% of the letter is him talking about white liberals who are like, well, we just need to go a little slower. We just need to like you guys could get freedom in a little more of a progressive way. And he's like, we need freedom now. Like, we are dying right now. And so this is also part of our understanding of global politics, is like we have to understand that we have to connect it to the world. It has to be systemic. And it has to also be urgent. So if you guys don't, if that's not enough for you, we'll show you some economic graphs here just to kind of hammer this point home. So this is a study that was done by some Marxist economists who were studying the drain of resources and money from the global south. So if you add all of this up from 1960 to 2017 in $2011, because that's roughly when they were able to kind of stabilize everything, about $60 trillion was expropriated from the global south. And let's say that one more time. $60 trillion, okay? Think about what that kind of money could do if it went to the people who are actually producing that wealth, right? Instead of getting sucked into the global north, the colonizing countries, the imperial core, right? This is the way the system works. We are expropriating huge amounts from this part of the world. So the next thing, this is just another graph to kind of show you guys how it's all working. So again, building up over time. If you think this was an old problem, it's not, right? This is just escalating more and more over time. You'll see the side on the left. That's $2,000 billion, $3,000 billion. So we're talking trillions of dollars every year that is being siphoned from these countries. And so when we look at other parts of the world and we're like, why aren't they developing? What's going on? Like, why can't they just get their stuff together? This is why. This is part of the system that we live under, and if we care about those parts of the world, we have to help. We have to kind of see ourselves as as connected to this process, right? I'll echo the words again of my communist granddad Michael Parenti, that the third world is not poor, right? You don't go to the poor countries to make money. These places are rich. They are not underdeveloped, they are overexploited. And if we care about dismantling the system that's created this world, then again, our scope has to be international, systemic, and urgent. And that is how we have solidarity with this thing. All right, guys. Any questions about that section before we hop into our next one? All good? Okay. So next, Mike's going to talk about a boomerang theory that we are... that Cicero kind of unpacks in the text.
It's a hard act to follow. Lord have mercy. But absolutely, the urgency he speaks to, like, look at these flags up here. Like, all of them, right? Experiencing such crises right now. Like, that urgency is correct. So let me start off. I got a question for you all, but I got a question for Joe first. Joe, can I raise the stakes? Can I raise the stakes, folks? Yeah, I can? Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm going to raise the stakes. Remember, I'm a middle school teacher. We give treats. Oh, yeah. Hey, if you participate and we're trying to get you up here, because we got to get you, we got some more to do. I got Altoids for you. Okay? Yes, please. I'll be offended if you don't come up. Well, they get other treats. In any case, okay, so I have a question for you all, and you please come up. Take an Altoid when you answer this. Somebody tell me, what is the object that this stick man is throwing? Yes, comrade. That's a boomerang. What's your name, comrade? Grant. Thank you, Grant. Get an Altoid, Grant. I'm going to let you figure that out. Thank you, Grant. All right, that's a boomerang. So, yeah, but this is not any ordinary boomerang. You see here, this boomerang brings colonialism and death when thrown, and somehow fascism on the other end.
I made this graphic, guys. I just want to let you know. Yes, thank you. I worked.
This
really
Joe's
hard.
lovely stick man. Yes, it deserves. So, what? This is not just a boomerang. This is the imperial boomerang, and this, as Joe said, is the boomerang theory. So let's get into it. I want to frame it off the top with two things. I want us to feel comfortable with the analogy to begin with. So one, again, another volunteer opportunity. Somebody tell me, one word, what does a boomerang do? I'm looking for a verb, by the way. Yes. Woo! Woo! Boom! Yes! Altoid? No pressure, but pressure. And what's your name, comrade?
Heather.
Heather, thank you, comrade Heather. Very good. Heather from the Valley, I'm from Granada Hills. Shouts out. Okay, God bless. Okay, so a boomerang returns. Boom. And somebody else tell me, to whom does a boomerang return? Yes. To a thrower. And comrade, your name. We know you, but Nick. Okay, come on up. Thanks, Nick. It returns to the sender, right? Boom. And we have here a man, he's a liberal man, as I'm told, and his mouth is just agape. He cannot fathom that all of those evils born at home come back to hurt himself. So that was part one of the framing. Second part, I just wanted to go over, being a teacher, I think about the questions of how do you educate people. This is political education that me and Joe run, right? So me and Joe, we thought about this a long time. We even went to San Diego the other weekend, and we engaged in some real halal fun down there. We had some nice kosher fun, and we decided these two things. We're going to do it by stunning people in all of our sheer intuitive brilliance. That's the first one. And then naturally, then we're just going to tell you what it says outright. Nope! Boom! No, that's not how we do it as socialists and communists. No, we do this, we're going to figure out how to learn in general and how to read. Trust me. Yes, I knew how to combine words and noises together. I didn't know how to read until relatively recently. So this is part of the task for us. And we're going to do it together, okay? So that's that's how I'm going to approach this section. Wow. Okay, so here's the method. How are we going to learn? Let's make ourselves conscious to some of the processes involved in reading and analysis. And how do we become conscious? By naming them and then walking through the process. That's what I hope. I have a 3-step process. Who cares? I just made this up. The first step, we're going to unpack things, then we're going to organize the information, and then synthesize. What do I mean? Wham. To unpack, we're just going to figure out what the text says. Basic. Okay, that's of course. Then organize it, okay? We're going to sort information out into categories, okay? You do this already. I'm smart people. And then lastly, when we synthesize, I'm thinking of Marx again. We got to go further with our information, right? Not just good enough to feel like you know what it says. You got to try to make something of it. So let's unpack, AKA figure out what the text is saying. One, I want you all to meditate on the following, okay? Shouts out to meditation religions. Boom. There we go. This is on page 41 in the copy they had here at All Power Books. Nobody read this out loud, okay? Take a second, maybe take 15 seconds. Go ahead, just read this. Read this and think. When you finish reading, just put your hand up quickly so I know when we're done. I am a teacher. I'm telling you, I get paid for this. Yeah. Okay, very good. All right, so keep that in mind. I picked that quote for a reason. What we want to do here, we want to figure out the through line between all these ideas. So go ahead. Can I actually have one volunteer read what's on the left and then one volunteer for the right? Can I see two hands at least, please? Yes, comrade, your name? Sarah. And then behind, what's your name? Tanya. Okay, Sarah, take left. Tanya, take right. Go ahead, Sarah.
Whether one likes it or not, at the end of the blind alley that is Europe, there is Hitler. At the end of capitalism, which is eager to outlive its day, there is Hitler. At the end of formal humanism and philosophic renunciation, there is Hitler.
Thank you. Go ahead, Tanya.
And then one fine day, the bourgeoisie is awakened by a terrific boomerang effect. The Gestapos are busy, the prisons fill up, the torturers standing around, cracked fence, flying sky.
Don't be shy. Just get up. I shouldn't have to remind you. Get up. Just take it. Yeah, well, I'm not going to remind you again. Okay. Hey, so what's the through line? What's the big idea? Somebody, please, in one sentence, synthesize this information for me. What do you think's going on here? What's the idea? You know we're calling it the boomerang. One sentence. Yes, go ahead, Nick.
Hitler is the essential manifestation of European colonialism.
That's a good one. We got another sentence? Everyone's astounded by Nick's genius. I am too. That was a good one, Nick.
Fascism, I should say.
No, of course. There's many ways to.
You know, it's just a metaphor for fascism.
So, what's the exercise about? I think, especially in a text as ideas rich as this, you need something to grip onto. At least that's my own reading strategy, right? So, okay, I hope silently you took Nick's idea or you have one for yourselves. So you have something to grip onto. So now it's time to organize it or clarify by sorting the information, all right? There's a lot there, and we're going to look at all those quotes again. So we started off with the basic premise. That's the idea of framing, right? Hitler is the culmination. Fascism is the culmination of stuff that's already in Europe, okay? That's our starting kind of idea. And then I'm going to point out some literary devices. Don't feel afraid. We went to high school, okay? It's just patterns of writing, and I'm just going to point them out. Very basic, okay? Luckily, I kind of cheated because I've read this a couple times, so I picked quotes, not even in order that they're presented. I picked good, juicy quotes for you, but you can use a text because the first thing he says in this section, this is my premise, this is the first thing he says, I think, in the second section of the book. He says, first, we must study how colonization works to decivilize the colonizer, to brutalize him in the true sense of the word, to degrade him, to awaken him to buried instincts, to covetousness, violence, race hatred, and moral relativism. And if I was to boil that down, and he does this at the very top, colonization means degradation for the colonizer, right? It destroys you from the very inside. So with that idea, now let's do some devices. The first one, there's a lot of listing going on here. Perhaps you even have your copy out. That's okay if you don't. I'm interested, just in that last quote, what does he say that what does colonization do to the colonizer? There's a couple of different things. What does colonization do to the colonizer? Can anybody tell me? There's a few verbs in there. Say it again. Degrade is one of them, but there's 4 in there. So come on, somebody else. Yes. Degrade, brutalize, what else? Decivilizes, and what is let me just cheat here, but and awakens him to buried instincts, like these, like subconscious kind of like dark impulses. Very good. There's listing, and I want us to just think like, why would somebody list, Why not just say it in one sentence? There's meaning in all of these moves. Because I'm on time, I think when I start listing things, when I start using a huge series of commas, it's because something's slippery, right? I'm having a hard time putting it in just one word. Or because I want to illustrate, I want to paint the picture of something that's really brutal, for example. So I think that's part of what's going on here. Similar idea here, repetition. On the same page, he says, and in France, they accept the fact. It's a weird phrase out of context, but there are certain things that in France they accept as just a fact of life, and these are brutal atrocities. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read these bullet points, and when I'm done with the sentence, I need you to say, and in France, they accept the fact. Do you all understand what I'm asking you?
It's like a call and response.
It's call and response. Yeah, exactly. So I am going to say, each time a head is cut off or an eye put out in Vietnam, and you say what? Yes. Each time a little girl is raped. Each time a Madagascan is tortured, they simply accept the fact. Okay? Why would somebody use repetition? What's the power of it? Like I said before with the listing, I think it's either because the atrocity is so great, you have to list multiple things to even leave an impression of what somebody has seen with their own eyes, something traumatic, or because the meaning is hard to capture. And the last thing I want to go over, at least in this part, is the theme. So not to bore you all with some more, but he talks about the end in a few different places in here, be it the proletarian revolution, or in this context, he says, oh no. On 36, a poison has been distilled into the veins of Europe, and slowly but surely, the continent proceeds towards savagery. Remember, the boomerang has to return, right? This is the end of all that. And at the very end, boom, those two quotes I showed you, right? At the end is Hitler, at that blind alley of Europe. At the end of capitalism, which is easier to outlive its day, there's Hitler. And suddenly people wake up, and it's domestically, right? The Gestapo are around locking up people. And domestically, the torturers having you on death row are refining the ways that they talk about what they have to do to you. Domestically, no longer abroad. So, theme is another way in. And then, okay, finally, this is going to go quick, but I want to go further with it. We got to synthesize our knowledge. I'm going to condense all this, and this is personalist because I went to theological school, so I like to talk about evil. I think all of this means that evil returns upon its host, and in other words, evil, when somebody wills it into being, and when it's visited on others, must ultimately also visit itself upon its own community to destroy it. That's at least how I synthesized all this, and this is a lovely way of capturing that, right? The bombs in Vietnam explode at home, and that was MLK saying this. So I'm going to leave you with this. It's not enough. Now that we kind of get a grip of it, we kind of unpacked it, we organized it, we're synthesizing, but it's not enough to simply know of this idea of the return. To really go further in our knowledge, we ought to also understand why the return occurs. Why should the imperial boomerang come around by necessity? Why does evil, when I do it to other people, why does it degrade myself? There are many ways to read this. There's like a psychoanalytic approach, right? Maybe if you are a religious person, you also think that there's some type of karmic cosmological justice involved. Okay, well, but look, such pondering sounds lovely, no? But we don't have the time. We have an essay's worth of ideas still to get through, and our time is so limited. Onwards, but please think about that question. I hope that helps you. Next.
All right, thank you, Mike. So yeah, we got a lot to kind of get through. This is our last section, and then we'll kind of wrap it up, and then we'll jump into our discussion. So on our last section, we're going to kind of help connect the dots about what Césaire is doing in this text. So we've talked about how this system of colonialism creates these absurd contradictions between what it says and what it actually does. We talked about how, given in an extreme, this system eventually turns on even those who had benefited from it previously. And then in the middle of this polemic, Césaire does something kind of interesting. He starts quoting all these old white guys. And you're just like, what is he doing? Like, what is he trying to show us? And I think one of the things that he's trying to do is he's trying to show us how kind of the sausage is made, so to speak, right? How this actually works. How the system actually creates an ideology to reproduce its own existence. So again, I will remind you guys of kind of how this whole thing works, right? You need two things for a system like this to exist. You need a superstructure to exist and to support it, and you need ideas that are manufactured in a class society. So I want you guys to remember that in a class society, from a materialist perspective, as Marxists, we understand that ideas are reproduced in a system, right? Ideas are created, just like they're like manufactured, like in a factory, kind of, right? And so that's kind of what we are going to be talking about here today, is how those ideas get reproduced. So could I get somebody to read this quote? This is Césaire talking about a real specific guy, okay? So he spends a lot of time talking about this guy called Roger Caillois, and we will talk a little bit more, I think, about why that is. But so could I get a volunteer to read this kind of bulk quote? These are our last two kind of big quotes. Go ahead, sir.
Indeed, no person in the Englishman of the Victorian age ever surveyed history with a conscience more serene and less clouded with doubt. Doctrine has the virtue of simplicity. That the West has been defined, that the West alone was not a thing, that at the borders of the West world there begins the shadowy realm of primitive thinking, which is dominated by the notion of sophisticated, incapable of logic, with the very novel of false thinking. Of course, there remained a few small facts that resist this doctrine, to wit, the invention of arithmetic and geometry by the Egyptians, to wit, the discovery of astronomy by the Assyrians, to wit, the birth of chemistry among the Arabs, to wit, the appearance of rationalism in Islam at a time when Western thought was a seriously theological task. But Monsieur Caillois soon put these impertinent details in their place. The strict and full study which preferences does not fit into a whole is precisely only a detail. That is to say, a negligible matter.
So again, you saw a really good example. Thank you for that. We saw another example of all this kind of repetition, this using repetition to kind of reinforce his idea, right? And so if you don't, if you're not going to take Césaire's word for it, why don't we hear from the man himself? So Césaire actually quotes Caillois at length. And so from this point on, I'm no longer going to dignify him by his last name. We're just going to call him Roger. So if anybody wants to read Roger's quote, maybe in a little bit more of an evil voice, because this is some evil, pretty heinous shit. Does anybody want to take a stab at an evil read on the quote? I can do it if not.
I don't know your evil voice.
I'm going to try it. Okay. For me, the questions of the equality of races, peoples, or cultures has meaning only if we talk about inequality in law, not inequality in fact. In the same way, men who are blind, maimed, sick, feeble-minded, ignorant, or poor, one could hardly be nicer to the non-Occidentals, are not respectively equal in the material sense of the word. To those who are strong, clear-sighted, whole, healthy, intelligent, cultured, or rich, like us Westerners. The latter have greater capacities which, by the way, do not give them more rights, but only more duties. Similarly, whether for biological or historical reasons, there exists at present difference in level, power, and value among the various cultures. These differences entail an inequality in fact. They are no way justify an inequality of rights in favor of the so-called superior peoples, as racism would have it. Rather, they confer upon the additional task of an increased responsibility. So I want you guys to hear kind of what he's doing here, right? This isn't outright race science, right? He's not saying this is a proto version of this idea of it's not about race, bro. It's about culture, okay? This is a culture thing, right? He even insidiously kind of flips this on the end, saying it's so much not about superiority because at the end, it's not even a good thing because we have more responsibility now and we have more stuff to do, right? This is kind of, you'll hear this in this kind of alpha bro misogyny thing where it's actually, we have all this responsibility to take care of women and it's actually a lot more, women are so delicate and need protecting and you have this way of flipping it in a way of making it sound positive to people who aren't freaking thinking critically. And so I think that this is part of why Césaire's focusing on this person because one, he's a literary critic. So this is personal for Césaire, right? So Césaire loves literature. He's a poet. He's someone that's dedicated his life. So this person, who is a prominent literary critic at the time that Césaire wrote this book, is furious that this guy exists, that he has such prominence, that he is so well respected as a literary critic. So Césaire is really trying to hammer home why, one of the how these kind of ideas get reproduced, and they kind of get this this gloss of like, this guy's a respectable academic. You need to listen to him, right? He knows what he's talking about, and he has this way of kind of flipping it where it's like, I'm not a racist. I just think that our culture's better. It's just a cultural thing. Like, it's not that big a deal, and it actually gives us more work, and it gives us more stuff to do. So it's actually not a bad thing. But what and so I think Césaire is actually very like kind of self-conscious of this, and so he understands that it's a little weird that he spends like multiple pages talking about this one dude. So why did he talk about this dude? Well, Césaire says in his quote, he says, "The reader must excuse me for having talked about Roger at such lengths, but his views are worth special attention because they are significant." Significant of what? Of the state of mind of thousands upon thousands of Europeans, or to be precise, of the state of mind of the Western petit bourgeois. Okay? So he kind of cuts the reader off of the pass here. Like, why are we focusing on this dude? He understands that early on, he understood early on that in a system like capitalism, the culture flows downstream, right? So this kind of class, like the petit bourgeois, who is close to the working class, is going to have this influence, this imbalanced influence, and like this is stuff that like George Jackson actually had similar thoughts on, and I think it's kind of interesting to think about how ideology can be adopted by people even when it harms them, even when it's not beneficial, even when it's harming other people, right? And we have inside of our culture, right, a culture that's built on misogyny and racism and homophobia and transphobia. We live in this society that creates and recreates this sickness every day, and it's our jobs as revolutionaries to be self-reflective, to be self-educated, and to root these things out ruthlessly inside of ourselves, right? Because that's why stuff like that, this class is so important, right? All this stuff we do here is important because all of this is part of the struggle, and part of the struggle is internal. It is being reflective. It's thinking about the world, thinking about how our actions and what we have here affects other parts of the world. So we're going to just do a quick kind of run through of, again, just a recap of how this system kind of works, okay? So this is inside the idea factory. So you have an existing system that requires ideas, right? It requires culture, science, art to support its exploitation. So if you go down, right, the system gains more legitimacy, the more intellectuals and science and artists rise up to support the existing system. So you have people that are platformed, that are made prominent because their ideas are supporting the existing system. And so as more intellectuals support the system and gain more legitimacy, the system gains more legitimacy. It's this infinite loop, right? And so we're going to talk about kind of some examples of how this happens, but we see this in real life all the time, right, guys? We see the IOF talking about being the most moral army. We talk about, different news articles, the subtle brutality of Cuba's war on freedom of the press, right? This picture in the Daily Telegraph in Britain about how all the Britons are celebrating the war in Iran, right? You have, charlatans like Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris who are like kind of regurgitating this idea of IQ being a good and like logical way of understanding culture and understanding humanity. All of this is part of the superstructure that benefits all these dipshits on the right who are part of the economic base, right? So I've got a video that I want to show. I think it's going to work. We're going to try. We were having some issues earlier, but if you guys don't know who this next guy is, I'm very happy for you, but he's just a kind of a dumb U.S. politician. But I think what he says is really informative, and I think it's a way a lot of kind of average Americans and the way the kind of bourgeois wants to reproduce ideologies of the other in other parts of the country. So let's take a look at this next one.
I'll tell people all the time, like, stop trying to explain why they hate us. I mean, Osama bin Laden's the best example. We've done nothing but help this guy. In the 80s, we funded his mujahideen against the Soviets. We funded his freedom fighters. We stopped Saddam Hussein from invading his home country of Saudi Arabia. Like, why the hell does this guy hate us? Because he does. Just because he does. Like, because
sometimes you don't need an explanation. Yeah. They hate us because we're not Muslims according to sort of their interpretation of Islam.
Right, and we're the most powerful Western country, and he hates Western civilization just as an idea. And that's really hard for your normal citizen and Westerner to even understand and comprehend. The same, by the way, is true of China, Russia. Like they are of the Eastern mind. They're not jihadists, but they're of the Eastern mind, and you can't understand it. You don't understand why you can't trust them. Like you just can't. Yeah. Like because they want their interests to be conflicting with yours. I don't know why. They don't have to be, but they want them to be. It's like, why are they our enemy? Why is Putin our enemy? I'm like, because he chooses to be.
Yeah.
For like this is the simplest answer, because he chooses to be. Same with Xi Jinping. There's not a good reason why we should be enemies. It's just a choice, but they make it. And we can make all the choices we want, they're still going to make their choice.
Yeah, all right. So sorry you guys had to watch that. It's not but I think it's a good example of showing like how idealism, how capitalist ideology gets into people's brain like a fucking brain worm, and they can't even think about what is actually going on in the world. What material reasons would people in West Asia have for being pissed off at the United States? What material reasons would Russia and China have for seeing the U.S. as an imperial power that is violent and dangerous and needing to be kind of contained? Like, oh, it just is, man. Like, it's just the Eastern mind. You just can't understand it. Like, this is the bullshit that gets reproduced and gets kind of repopulated, and we have to kind of, part of our goal and our process here is to dismantle this kind of stuff and reproduce a materialist understanding of reality. Because who benefits from this kind of bullshit? Who benefits from having perpetual enemies, from misunderstanding people in other parts of the world? It's ExxonMobil, it's Raytheon, it's Lockheed Martin, it's all these different companies that benefit from conflict, that benefit from resource extraction. And we have to dismantle this side. And so on the other side of it, we have another, this idea, like we hear a lot of times, right? Where do our precious metals come from, and where does all of these like resources for our phones and electric cars? This is another kind of example of how this base and superstructure works. If I can get okay. See, we had this issue last time.
Throughout the whole history of slavery, I mean, I'm going back centuries, never in human history has there been more suffering that generated more profit and was linked to the lives of more people around the world ever in history than what's happening in the Congo right now. The cobalt that's being mined in the Congo is in every single lithium-ion rechargeable battery manufactured in the world today. Every smartphone, every tablet, and crucially, every electric vehicle. And it's being mined in appalling, heart-wrenching, dangerous conditions.
All right. So what I want to kind of help us understand is this is the base. This is how this actually works, and it supports all of the stuff that we have here, right? All the ways that we live. This economic base is supporting the superstructure. So I know we're probably running tight on time, so I'm going to fly through these next parts. But this is just a quote that I think this is probably my favorite quote in the text, and I think Césaire shows a really good, a really poetic and really cutting way of understanding how you understand the material world. He says, and the striking thing they all have in common is the persistent bourgeois attempt to reduce the most human problem to comfortable, hollow notions. The idea of the dependency complex of Mennoni, the ontological ideas in the Reverend Temples, the idea of tropicality in Gouraud. What has become of the Banque d'Indochine and all of that? And the Bank of Madagascar, and the bullwhip, and the taxes, and the handful of rice to the Madagascans and the Nake, and the martyrs, and the innocent people murdered, and the blood-stained money piling up in your coffers, gentlemen. They have evaporated, disappeared, intermingled, become unrecognizable in the realm of pale rationations. So he is saying, he's like, you guys are talking about all this stuff. All these guys are talking about all these different ideologies of why it's okay that we're doing what we're doing. But what about the material reality? What about the fucking banks? What about the resources? What about the violence? What about the exploitation? He cuts straight to the heart of what is actually going on, because we see it every fucking day. We, as revolutionaries, have to look at our problems. We cannot look away, because we know what kind of things happen when we do look away, when we aren't plugged in, when we aren't thinking about the world in an internationalist perspective. So that is the end of that last section. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, so we are going to fly through this real quick. This is kind of our wrap up. Just this kind of where do we go from here, right? What is the where do we want to kind of or where does Cesare say that we should kind of go from here? He kind of ends the text really abruptly, and I think it's interesting the two kind of things he focuses on. So he has kind of a two-step solution for the colonies in Africa. He says, step one, don't trust the United States, which I think is generally good advice. And then number two, build socialism, okay? So again, remind you guys what's happening here, okay? So as he's writing this, oh wait, did I go too far? Oh no, okay. So we'll read this quote real quick. So he says, so dear friends, here you have to be careful. I know that some of you, disgusted with Europe, with all that hideous mess which you did not witness by choice, are turning, in great numbers towards America and getting used to looking upon that country as a possible liberator. What did God send, you think? The bulldozers, the massive investments of capital, the roads, the ports, but American racism. So what? Even European racism in the colonies has inured us to it, and yet we are ready to run the great great Yankee risk. So once again, be careful. American domination, the only domination from which one never recovers. I mean, from which one never recovers unscarred. So this might seem a little weird looking at this through a 2026 lens, but we have to remember kind of like what was going on at the time of, okay, there it goes. What was going on in the time of, we looked at the map earlier. Colonialism is collapsing, and what the United States is going in is saying, you guys don't need these colonial powers. We can help you. We've got lots of money. We've got this cool thing called the World Bank and the IMF, and we'll hook you up with tons of money, and it'll be great, and everything's going to be fine. Don't ask any questions about all the stipulations with the loans. We're just here to help you out. And so Cesare is swooping in and kind of saying, actually, guys, this is also part of the same system. It is a Ponzi scheme. This system is in a transition. And but we need to be aware and understanding about what's going on and not trust the wolf in sheep's clothing. So his next kind of solution for us is to build socialism. So this is literally the very last paragraph of the last of the book. Could I get somebody to read this? This is actually going to be our last one. So I lied last time. This will be our last reading for the text. Somebody give us Nick, you want to go ahead?
Down to saying that the salvation of Europe is not a matter of a revolution. It is a matter of the revolution. The one which, until such a time as there is a class of society, will substitute for the narrow tyranny of the united surplus Congress of multi-class that still has its university. Because it suffers its cut from all the rocks of history, from all the universities.
So he ends, that's literally the last word of his text is the proletariat, because we remember that our hope, right, the hope of the world, the hope of the poor and exploited masses all across this planet was, is, and will always be socialist liberation and destruction of class society and the ability to benefit from the things you actually own and produce, right? That is what we're working for, that is what we believe in, and that is what we're trying to do is dump this whole damn thing on its head and to help us build something different. And so you guys are a part of that, being here today. I appreciate you guys being here. That is the last thing that we are going to talk about in the presentation section. I know we started a little late, we went over just a little bit, but does anybody, before we jump into discussion, have any questions? Okay.
This is not the time to be shy.
Yeah. No, you guys are gonna. I'm gonna make you guys talk now. We're gonna have our discussion time. So remember, as part of our processes, this is only half of the process, right? We kind of talk through the text, help synthesize stuff together. Now, we really get to do education together. Okay, so we want you guys to kind of take this part, build the discussion, and to start thinking about how we can understand this. So we're going to go through some discussion questions. I appreciate the comrades online. You guys can hop into your discussion now. We love you all, and solidarity forever to everybody here and listening on there. So let's go. So what we'll do in our discussion is let's jump into, let's see, 1, 2, 3. Let's do like 3 groups, I think, of like 4 or 5. So we jump into 3 groups, and then we will jump into discussion from there. So, all right.